It's a pleasure being here with you. I prepare a presentation. Let me now share. Okay. Can you see the presentation?
Yes.
All good?
Perfect.
Okay. So I prepare a presentation based on a case that I worked. I worked for the Algarve. Algarve is a region in the southern part of Portugal. It's a region that's more known for its tourism. So part of its economy is based on tourism. So it's in the south of Portugal with beautiful beaches. And I did a work for them based on the research that I did with British tourists. So the presentation in terms of the model that I'm presenting here today is based on that research with the British sample project that was ordered by the Algarve Tourism Board. But before going to the Algarve and the destination brandy or the destination brand Algarve, I would like to start with certain concepts on branding, and I would like to start showing here a slide. This slide, let me see if I can. Okay, just one simple question. So I'm showing you a T-shirt here. It's like a sports shirt, and my question is a simple question. So you see this sport shirt is sold at Costco or any sports shops, and I'm wondering how much money would you be willing to pay for this sports shirt? It's like a normal sport shirt that is sold at Costco or any other sport shop. How much you think you would be willing to pay? How much do you think it costs? Any idea? Well, you have to mix it off. So
$30.
Any idea how much you be willing to pay for a sports shirt? $10, 15, 20?
I'm very cheap, João, so I'll pay $5.
$5? Well, maybe 25, maybe something like that, probably.
In the chats, we have everything from $15 to $25.
15 to 25, yeah, probably something like that for a normal shirt. It's sold at Costco Sport. Yeah, let's assume that will be $25. So what about now? How much will you be willing to pay for this shirt? Is it the same or something changed here? What's going on? Would you be willing to pay 25 or you be willing to pay more for this shirt now?
The price went up. They said 25 now.
25 now, from 5 to 25 now?
No, somebody said 25. That's the price went up. So $5 more.
Exactly. Well, I guess the majority of you, if you compare these shirts, you'll be willing to pay a little bit more for this shirt, for this second shirt, which is a little bit silly if you compare each shirt. It's just a piece of textile that changed the value of the shirt, isn't it? So I wonder if this piece of textile that you put in a shirt really changed the cost of producing this particular shirt. I guess it doesn't. I'm sensing some process is happening here in order that people are willing to pay more for the shirt, this shirt that has here this swoosh, the logo. So people are willing to pay for a basic thing that happens in society. It's about the brand. Well, the brand has a value on guaranteeing some kind of quality on the object. So that's why we're willing to pay a little bit more money, because I'm sure that the shirt is from Nike, the quality will be better. So that's the brand is a guarantee of quality. So that's one angle to see the relevance of branding in today's society. But also there's another level here in terms of the relevance of the brands on objects. And the other element of the relevance of the brands on objects, it's about the use of brands to self-expression. For people use brands to self-express themselves in society. So in terms of reference, of individual reference and individual cultural element of identification of the individual in society, people use brands in order to place themselves within society, define themselves within society. So you see the relevance of brands, particularly in the 80s and the 90s, the increased relevance of brands, exactly because of that. There's an explosion of products available into the market, which means me as a consumer, in order to lower risk and in order to lower the cost opportunity of evaluating each offer or each product, I will trust in a brand that guarantees me a certain type, a kind of offer. There's a guarantee that what I buy with a brand will guarantee me quality. It's also will guarantee me some kind of, I can use this brand to self-express my personality. So there's the basic elements, what's going on in society in terms of branding. And it's such a thing in terms of branding and the relevance of brands in today's society, that brands actually they have value. They have value in terms of the companies. Like in 1983, it was the first time that happened. Obispo was allowed to include the valorization of their brand as goodwill in their balance sheet. So it means that nowadays brands or companies can valorize their brands and they can include as an asset, intangible asset in their balance sheets. And it's indeed interesting that now companies are trying to understand the value of those brands. So what I brought here, it's a slide from 2019, from last year. Interbrand is a brand consulting company, and every year they do a valorization in terms of brands. If you can see from this table, Apple is valorizing $234 billion. That's a valorization of the brand. We are not talking about tangible assets, skills, patents, nothing like that. We're just talking about the power or the company that can use this brand is valorized on 234 billion. So here's the relevance of brands in today's society. I know that for companies that have strong brands will guarantee future cash flows because people will buy these brands because they guarantee a certain kind of offer, certain kind of quality, and in certain categories of products, they can use the brands to self-express their personality and their place within society. So we can think about brands applied to products and service, and that's well explained within academia and within the industry. Of course, the next question is, we start talking about brands and branding, and we start stretching the concept of brands to other areas. We start talking about people as brands and places as brands. So the question here is, can we talk about place brands? Can we talk about saying that countries or regions and cities are also brands? Can we say that, for instance, Scotland is a brand? Is it Vienna a brand? Is the USA a brand? So that's the issue that we can start thinking. Are really countries or cities or regions brands? Can they be managed as products and service are branded brands from organizations? Well, the discussion here is a big argument about yes, it's possible, or no, it's not possible. It's an impossibility. And the thought about branding places, a lot of people, they say that it's not possible to brand places like we brand corporations, is because of lack of control. I mean, organizations and the way they control brands is much easier and it's much more current environment than places, than countries, cities, or regions. And of course, the management of the offer, the touch points or the elements of the organization are controlled by the elements of those specific organizations. So that's one reason why people say, no, you're talking about branding places, that really doesn't exist. Another argument is that, well, we cannot change stereotypes. People stereotype about people from certain countries or certain cities, and it's impossible to change those stereotypes. And once again, lack of control. I can control the way people working within the organization, my staff, giving guidelines the way they behave. I cannot give guidelines to people that live in a city, on a region, or in a country. So that's the issue of the impossibility of managing places as brands. And so the argument is investing in branding is a waste of precious resources. So that's one argument that exists in the market. Of course, you can see in a different angle, and you can see that brands are a possibility. And a possibility because brands always mean something to consumers. They are embedded in meaning. And that meaning evolves. It's not static. It means that stereotypes that people have for a region or city or countries do evolve. They are not static, they evolve during the years. The issue here is control. Can I control how the stereotypes are evolving, me as the manager of these place brands, or will I leave the control of these stereotypes to other people, to other organizations? So the issue here, and the thing that I want to demonstrate with the case, is that yes, there is techniques, there is ways that we can manage those stereotypes, that we can manage those images, which you can do it at the level of the communication and at the level of the product. So there's two levels that we can manage brands. So yes, they are manageable, and I will show you in this case how we can manage those elements. So this takes us to a new field of research, kind of new kind of place branding, new field of research. Actually started by one of the first person that started talking about this is David Gardner. He's here listening to this seminar. So he started talking about place marketing, place branding back in '97, I think, with Kotler. And I started thinking about what is the issue about marketing place and branding places. So when you're talking about branding places, suddenly specifically from the 21st century, for 20 years, there was a sudden increase in interest in this concept. And the issue of the increase of this concept was based on the increased competition among places. And it's interesting to see that competition from the 90s exploded, and exploded by a basically issue in terms of the geographic barriers just collapsed, and collapsing by different reasons. One, of course, it was logistic and transportation. That due to globalization, we were able to carry goods from one place to another, and people could move around easily. Also, we cannot forget in the 90s the fall of the Iron Curtain from Eastern Europe. So suddenly, and specifically if you see from the eyes of a European, suddenly Europe got a lot bigger. So the size increases, just doubles the size, which meant that the competition to attract investment, attract people, attract tourists just increased dramatically. So each country and region and cities are now competing globally for attraction of resources and competence, and that is one of the reasons why people start looking for new techniques in order to attract these very limited and desired resources. The issue here is that also a lot of these different places have time to adapt, have time to build the infrastructures. So which means that these available infrastructures that were kind of a competitive advantage between countries start disappearing and cease to be an element of competitiveness. So other elements start to be important to attract tourists and investors and labor and companies. So that's one reason why this sudden interest of branding that started in the 90s and is carrying on now in the 21st century. Of course, when you talk about place brands, you think about target and segments and people that we are talking to, they are very diverse. We're talking about investors, we're talking about tourists, you're talking about new residents or labor, you're talking about workers, you're talking about students, for instance. So they are very different people with different needs that will be attracted by different variables. So one element that you have to think about when you're developing place branding is about who are the target market, who is the elements that we are relevant for these different segments. It means that when we are managing image and managing variables and managing attributes of building our place, we have to take into consideration these different segments. But also it's true when you develop infrastructure, for instance, for tourists, the people that are using these infrastructures are not only tourists. Actually, these infrastructures are used by tourists, are used by new residents, are used by investors, are used by students, so are used by different types of segments. So of course, when you're thinking about brands and branding, place branding, yes, it's important to think about the different segments, but also it's relevant that to acknowledge that the infrastructures that are used by certain segments will be used by other segments. So there's a strong positive relation between brands that are built for tourists and brands that are built also thinking about these new investors or new entrepreneurs or new students. And in those terms, we cannot only focus in one segment, but you can see that this segment or the elements that we are developing for this segment can be used for other different segments. But for me here, for my case that I brought here in terms of the Algarve, I test and develop this model thinking about exclusively about tourists. So if you think about tourists, it's a very global industry, which is a very competitive industry. So just in Europe, so we have a perspective in terms of Europe, today there's more than 500 regions, tourism regions within Europe. So you have 500 regions competing among themselves to attract tourists every year. So it's really, really hard. It's a really hard industry to attract these tourists to visit us. But it's also a very important industry for the different countries. I've got here some data from 2017 and from the WTO, World Tourism Organization, and they estimated and forecast that close to 13% of the global GDP was because of tourism. It's interesting now with the pandemic, with this new virus, you can see the collapse of several economies, for instance, in Portugal or Italy or Spain. One of the big reasons is because of the collapse of tourism. So you have economies based or which are 15-20% depend on tourism. When this virus came, it's collapsing the economies. So if you think about in this perspective, destination branding targeting tourists is something that is very urgent, meaning the destinations, the politicians, the people in charge of this destination have to think strategically in order to differentiate the offer and attract these tourists. Of course, there's a very naive way to approach destination branding. For instance, I brought here a tagline in terms of tourism, looking for a sand and beach destination, and got your tagline say, we have the best beach and friendly people in the Mediterranean. Well, this can be a value proposition of different destinations, but can be a destination from Turkey, can be from Greece, can be from Spain, can be from Cyprus, Malta, Croatia, etc., etc., etc. So if you think about a value proposition which is based on friendly people and beaches and Mediterranean, it's not very different. It does not differentiate your product from the other ones. It's kind of boring. It's kind of just spending money communicating these that all the other destinations have. So yes, it is a big waste of money when you start thinking about destination branding in this aspect of communicating just about certain elements of product. So we have to think a little bit more strategically about and go a little bit further than a basic and simple value proposition, because it does not differentiate you from different destinations. So what does it take to us? This takes us to thinking about tourists. What is tourists? Well, what are they looking for? We know that the basic assumptions that destination brands, just as product brands or service brands, they do serve a dual purpose for consumers. Just like I was showing the Nike brand that serves the need in terms of functionality, in terms of quality. I know if I buy a Nike shirt, I know it will last. I need to, in terms of functionality, will help me in terms of my sports. It also has a representational dimension. I feel proud to use a Nike shirt. I feel like a sportsman. Well, destination brands, some brands are able to build that in their value proposition, meaning consumers use the brands also because of the functional aspects. It means I lowered the risk. I know what I'm going to expect if I visit that destination, but also I feel proud in order when I go to holidays to a certain destination. I feel proud of myself. I feel certain pride when I go back to work and tell my colleagues I went to Peru to Machu Picchu. I went to Amazons. So I feel like a realization, a self realization. So it means that dimensions, the destinations is also a dual dimension in terms of uses. There's a functional and a representational dimension. An important aspect when we're talking about place brands and specific in the context of tourism, it's the case that I brought, we have to think about consumer behavior. So we always think about brands, we have to think about motivations. What are the motivations to consume? We should think about place brands or destination brands, which is brands applied to tourism brands. We have to think about the motivation to travel. And tourists have basically two big motivation forces that impose or make people want to travel and invest money and time. There's two elements, those two axes are not exclusive but are inclusive. But one is breaking the routine. People go work, home, work, home, work, job, go home, and people want to break that routine. So that routine has to be broken. So that cycle has to be broken. So people just need to take holidays to break that routine. So that's one issue of wanting to go on holidays. But of course, if people start holidays but they stay at home, if you ask people, what did you do on your holidays? And people say, well, I stayed at home. I really didn't take holidays. Well, but you did take holidays. You didn't go to work. So you had leisure. You stayed at home. So you broke the routine. You broke the routine of going to work and come home. You broke that routine. But you didn't seek new experience. You failed to have a new experience because you stay at home. So this second X in terms of motivation to travel and or reasons why people invest time and money to travel and seek and go to different places and sleep and spend a night in a different place is also because they are looking for new experience. So if you think about in this context, the destination brand, the offer that we can give and we need to give to our consumers, it's both ways. We have to guarantee that we are breaking the routine to our tourists, and we are providing a certain new context and new experience to these tourists. In this way, we guarantee satisfaction to tourists. So if you think in these two angles, these two motivational forces, we can start thinking about how we're going to develop our strategy for our destination brands. Another element here in terms of motivation to travel. So we have the motivation to why people travel, the reasons people travel, and you have to think about travel is an investment. If it's an effort, it's an effort in terms of cognitive effort, and it's also investment of money. So people are doing that because they have strong motivation to do it. Another interesting stuff about tourists is that tourists are semiotic. So you enter here in the element of semiotics. And tourist attractions, when people travel, they build, when people consume signs, which is very interesting in terms of tourism behavior. And let me put here, let me just clarify this element in terms of semiotic, in terms of the build sites of tourist attractions. Let me show you a rock. So I'm showing you this normal rock. It's a rock. And when you see this rock, and I would ask you, well, it's a normal rock. Would you spend 10 minutes in a line to see this rock, or would you spend $20 to see this rock? Probably your answer is no. Why would I spend 10 minutes in a line to see this rock and spend 20 minutes or spend $20 then to enter the museum to see this rock? Doesn't make any sense. So to see a rock, why should I do that? Well, the other reason I would spend 10 minutes, spend $20 to pay to see this rock, and wait 10 minutes is because this rock has some kind of value. But the rock itself, it doesn't have value. Of course, the value comes when I build you a label. So if I build a label here, then the object has value. So the object itself, it doesn't have value. The value is in the marker. So it's the marker, the moon rock, that gives value to the object, this stone, this rock. Of course, by the marker, what it's telling me, it was an achievement of mankind. It went to the moon, were able to get this rock and brought it back to a museum, back to Earth. So it's interesting that the object is not, the object is not, it's not, the value is not on the object, the value is in the marker that gives sense to the object. And it's exactly the same thing for tourism. I'll show this next picture because majority of you will recognize this is the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao. It was also a build marker. So in the around 83, 84, Bilbao, which is city in the Basque country close to France, was passing a tough period of degradation, post-industrial city, and the committee of the city decided that they should do something about, they should think about diversifying the economy, they should think about tourism, and one way of doing that it was building an attraction. So they convinced Frank Gehry, by that time a young architect, not well known, well, probably well known by Vincent and David and all the architects, but for the common people, was not that well known. He was still a young guy. And they decided to invest in this young guy and decided, yes, we should create a unique and a very fast moving and a fast thinking, forward thinking object. And they did it. Also, they were lucky enough to convince the Guggenheim Foundation to send their collection to outside the US. So it was the first time the Guggenheim Foundation lended their collection to a non-US country. So with a basic museum and a basic attraction, this city could start being a beacon for tourism, and they could diversify the economy. So it's interesting how we could leverage, this destination could leverage its equity and its attraction by building an object full of meaning and full of value, but an object that was, of course, well communicated, well built, and with a lot of interest, of course. Obviously, now you see all the destinations competing and copying exactly what Bilbao did 40 years ago, as simple as that, because it worked fine. This takes me to the issue that when you're talking about place branding or destination branding, we're talking about managing markers, these elements as symbols, it's elements that gives meaning to the symbols, and also we're talking about variables. What are the variables that compose these destination brands? And this is exactly what I need to think when we are managing a brand. So when we're managing a brand, that we as consumers have an image of these brands. So we have expectations. It's something that we have stereotype. We have an image of something that if I consume that product, that service, or that destination, I will expect to get some kind of reward. We as brands, brand or marketeers or politicians, the person in charge of the organization or the destination, what we have to do is build the promise that goes had the expectation of the consumers. So we as marketeers, we manage identity. So we build promises, we build variables that we deliver to our consumers. So what we want as marketeers or CEOs or the persons in charge of the organization, we want our promises to be current with the expectations of consumers. So in these regards, we have to manage variables of our offer. So what kind of variables can we do it in terms of destination brands? And then here is where I want to go and achieve and show the model that I developed for the Algarve, this southern destination in south of Portugal. So what I did in terms of the Algarve brand, in terms of research, we decided to interview British tourists. Tourists from Britain represents around 40% of consumers in the Algarve. So we wanted to understand what made British consumers go to the Algarve. What are the image of the Algarve? How did they build that image of the Algarve? So we went to the Algarve. We talked to consumers, British consumers, the Algarve. When we went to Costa del Sol, a region in southern Spain, very similar to the Algarve, and then we went also to Britain, where we interviewed also British people that were just living their daily lives in Britain. So from these three different samples, we start creating a model, and we start realizing that these people were building the image of the Algarve based on 9 dimensions. So we start building the model on variables, identify these variables, and realize that these variables were part of a broader dimension. Dimension then had an implication in terms of image of the destination. Now let me show each of these dimensions that we came up with. The first dimension that emerged when we talked with the sample was the dimension development. So when we start talking to these tourists, we're talking about tourists, and tourists based in a definition, in a broader definition, because we have here people that were residents, temporary residents in the Algarve, people that have spent like 3, 4, 6 months, and also tourists who only spend like 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. So we have people that had a property in the Algarve, spends part of the year in the Algarve and part of the year in Britain. So we had a mix of these two segments. But the first variable that emerged was development. So people were saying, yes, we go to a certain destination because we want to break the routine, we're looking for new experience. So we do expect these places to have cater for us. We do expect to have hotels or condominiums or restaurants or bars or certain areas that we need in order to stay and to satisfy our functional and physiological needs. But also we need for these places to have, we need to have a balance between all this development in terms of hotels and convenience and museums, but also we need to have some aspects that are very specific to the location. We need to have the rural areas. rural areas that are specific to that destination, specific to the Algarve, with these specificities. We need to have the historic elements that are specific to the Algarve. So people valorize those elements. Those elements are important to define the Algarve and valorize the Algarve. It was also important to differentiate the offer of the Algarve for other destinations similar to the Algarve, for instance, Costa del Sol. Costa del Sol is slightly different from the Algarve in terms of development. It's much more well built. Of course, it is a destination that's starting to develop in the 60s. So it's much more about hotels, it's much more marinas, more urban than Algarve, which is more rural. So people were comparing one to the other and saying, well, the issue that we see, we like the Algarve in terms of impact, in terms of image, we like the diversity. I think Algarve is diverse, it's beautiful, it's very peaceful because of the balance of rural areas and these historic elements. So when you start thinking about this element in terms of development, of course you have to think about what are the politicians, what are they allowing to build? Are they guaranteeing the true balance between rural areas in terms of agriculture? So are you diversifying the economy, or are you just concentrating everything in terms of tourism as it's allowing to build new hotels, new condominiums, new marinas, or is just limiting the construction of those and allow other industries to exist because they will contribute positively as well to tourism. So here we think about the balance between development, rural areas, and also the historic elements. Should we maintain, should we keep the elements of historic elements? Because those will be the specific elements that will diversify, will define and differentiate this destination from other destinations. So will give me a justification to consume this specific destination. So here the role of the politician and the people in charge of the destination is to guarantee exactly the balance between these variables of development. Of course, then you have the marketeers that have the role of communicating exactly this balance of different variables of this dimension development. So we have two areas of intervention here in terms of level of products and level of communication. Another element that emerged specifically with this British, which was very interesting, was the landscape. So a lot of people were saying, well, we really like the Algarve, and I think the Algarve is really different from Costa del Sol and other areas, because the landscape actually is very similar to the UK, very similar to the Cornwall. They were identifying more the southeast of the UK. So in terms of the cliffs, in terms of the type of beach, there were some similarities, and that was an interesting definition in terms of aesthetics of these British consumers, that you were doing similarities between the Algarve and Cornwall. Also, people were saying, valorizing Algarve not because of the beaches, but also because of all elements of landscape, including mountains and including countryside and natural parks. So once again, the elements of nature and agriculture are elements, truly important elements to differentiate the destination Algarve from other destinations. So there was the issue here, similarity to the UK, that was valorized by the British, but also because people valorize mountains and countryside because they will provide more activities. So there was a sense of diversity, of a brand more diverse, because it had certain different types of landscape that are available to this region. Of course, here, if you think about landscape and the geographical place of this destination, you can intervene more in terms of communication. You shouldn't be communicating Algarve as a beach destination, which is something that Algarve used to do. Algarve used to just communicate, go to our destination because of our beautiful beaches. So they are always communicating. All the communication elements was based on beaches. And then there was a realization that was not really a strength. It was something that, yes, it was important, but it was not the only thing that was important. Also communicating different types of landscape, countryside, natural park, and the mountain range was important because it allowed people to provide doing different activities. And we go to activities very, very soon as another dimension. Of course, linked to the element of landscape and green landscape and similar to UK, the dimension climate also emerged. So there was another important dimension that defined the Algarve. So when you were asking, okay, define the Algarve in 3 words, people say, well, the sun, the light. So those are elements that were defining this destination. Of course, when you think about that, we cannot change anything about climate. Climate is what it is. It's inherent to the destination. It is what it is. Of course, what we can do is communicate what we have in terms of climate. And we can communicate in terms of light, temperature, and precipitation. That were the variables that the consumers were using to define this dimension climate and define the destination Algarve. It was interesting because this dimension was an important dimension in terms of functional attributes. It is a dimension that lowers the risks of consumers. Because if you live in the UK, you can really not plan a barbecue in next weekend. You never know. You might say, yeah, let's do a picnic in Hyde Park Saturday. Well, normally you say, let's do a picnic in Hyde Park it's Saturday if it doesn't rain, because you cannot forecast in 2 or 3 days. There's always a risk. Of course, due to climate in southern Portugal, this is a very humid climate, very similar to California. You can forecast weather. You know very well that June, July, August, September is very, very hard to rain. It's very, very hard to have bad weather. So yes, you can plan. Yes, you can go to the beach. Yes, you can go to barbecue. So you get a sense of less risk, lowers your risk of consumption. So it's something that was also used to define the Algarve as a reliable, simple brand, because you could anticipate what you're going to do in that destination. So it lowered the risks. So yes, climate is something that I cannot control as a marketeer, but I can communicate those elements to my target market. So that's one way of managing this dimension. Another important dimension that emerged from this research were the activities. When you go on tourism, I talked about motivation to travel. So people want to travel to break routine, but they are looking for new experience. These imply doing something, doing activities. And activities were identified or divided in a set of variables. So you could see more physical activities like sports, thinking about golf, tennis, or jogging. So more like physical activities, or running, or walking, or going to the beach, swimming. So those were more physical activities. So that's one set of activities. But also there was activities of sightseeing, and that was important as well for tourists, because they will, once again, they wanted to see new experience. And sightseeing was something very important for these British. They were saying, yes, I'm going to the Algarve, but I don't want to spend 1 week going to the beach. I want to do more. I want to see other things. So here, when this starts looking in detail what is looking for other things, you start seeing the relevance of landscape. I want to see mountains, I want to see the countryside, I want to see the orange groves, and I want to see the historic elements. So here you see how landscape or development start affecting activities. So people want to do something, which one of the elements is sightseeing. I need to have development that is balanced with local or specific elements of this destination. Other important elements in terms of activities for the majority of these consumers were social activities, meaning people want to socialize while they are on holidays. So they're looking for other people to do something. So meaning that they need to go to a bar, they like to go to a bar, they like to go to a restaurant, they like to go to a cafe, they like to go places where there's people. it will be silly to go to a bar or restaurant what is empty. It's kind of why? What's the point? It's not very fun. Which takes as our aspect of this dimension to another dimension. And the other dimension is other tourists. So it's interesting here when you think about the other tourists or the other people that are within this destination. They're not only a segment of our efforts in terms of targeting, but also an element, a specific element of consumption. Meaning, once again, if I go to a restaurant, I expect other people to be in that restaurant, meaning probably other tourists, if I'm talking about the Algarve, or maybe other local or other Portuguese, which are also tourists. It was interesting to see that in terms of these other tourists, the evaluation was there was a division about these other tourists. So because I was doing with British tourists, this research was based on British tourists. These British tourists defined these other tourists in different segments. So they defined the British, they defined other nationalities other than British, and they defined the Portuguese. And it was interesting. The British evaluated other British as some certain kind of boring. Why? Because they were taking the element of looking for new experience. If you go to a place in the Algarve and everybody is British, the element of new experience is not there. Yes, I broke the routine. I'm not going to work. I'm in a different place. But in terms of social activity, I'm doing with the same stuff with the other people, with the other British, which takes me a little bit of the motivation why I want to travel abroad. Of course, when we talk with residents and people that spend more time in the Algarve, that have second homes, the British also gave a sense of safety. So it was kind of also a safety net. So we consider there's a duality in terms of how people of these British were seeing the other British tourists. But it was interesting when we ask about what about other nationalities? What about Dutch? What about the Swedish? What about US? What do you think about these other nationalities that are consuming the same destination? They were saying, yes, it is nice because in that case, we do experience new routines. We do experience a new culture. It is fun to see other people from other nationalities. So it gives me an add-on to our experience in this destination. Of course, also they were saying that, well, when it's only Dutch or Spanish or the tourists and there's no Portuguese, the sense is that everything is built for tourists. So it's kind of touristy, and the British was saying, well, everything is kind of being built to tourists. It might be not as good quality, and we might not get so much good value. So when we do see Portuguese as tourists consuming that specific restaurant, that specific brand, or that specific park or museum, we feel more safe. We feel that we are doing a good deal, because if the Portuguese are going to that place, it's because they really know what they're doing. So it lowers our risk as consumers. So it's funny here when you see the other tourists in the angle that are not on the target market but are part of the brand. It has implication in terms of how I'm going to deal, how I'm going to manage this brand. Well, as a marketer, you have to think about diversification. You should not be focusing on just one market. Diversify your segments within different markets. Yes, you need the British, it will be fun, but you need also the British, the Irish, the Swedish, the German, the US, the Brazilians. So diversify, because it will enrich the experience of each nation that are consuming the brand. Also, this is important in terms of your communication in the different countries. One thing also we tested, if you do mass marketing in specific destination, in this case in Britain, meaning mass markets on the metro, or on the double deckers, on TV, on radio, the sense of these British was like, well, everybody's seeing this advertisement on TV is because all the British are going there. So if all the British are going there, I don't want to go where all the British are going. So in this sense, this mass market, destination branding mass market might not be the most efficient for destination. You should be much more focused in terms of identifying your targets and much more focused in terms of your advertising, and do not invest millions on mass market. Might not be the best trick or the best efficiency in terms of the money spent on advertising. So here again we see how we can manage this destination, taking into account that tourists are inherent part of the destination. They are not only consumers, but they are part and assets of this destination. Let's just go back one aspect of the tourists. Go back in terms of activities and the relevance of activities. When you think about traveling, one aspect that is important as well, normally you don't travel alone. So tourism is a social activity. So normally you travel within a group, and normally the group is a family. So in order to satisfy each individual element of this group, meaning a parent, a child can be 8 years old or 15 years old, a 17-year-old, and the parents might be 50 or 55 or 60 or 40. You need to satisfy all the individual needs of different segments. So you need to satisfy the individual need of a 10-year-old or a 55-year-old. So in terms of activities, when you're building the activities of your destination, you have to involve the entrepreneurs and make and assure that you have the business developing offers that target these different individuals that are traveling to a specific destination. So we cannot forget the individual satisfaction will promote the group satisfaction, and the group satisfaction normally it's based on the nuclear family, which is composed by parents and children. So we have to think about in terms of product that developing this destination, thinking about individual needs of this specific tourists. Another important element in terms of activity, it's gastronomy. So we were talking about activities, sports, social activities, sightseeing. One of the most important social activities, as I was talking about, was going to bars and restaurants. So gastronomy emerged as a really important social activity. And it's so important that we isolate it as a dimension by itself. And it was interesting in terms of dimension, because gastronomy was being evaluated by the local gastronomy, what was available, typical, and typical as a cultural element, something again is breaking the routine, is looking for a new experience. So the cultural element or the possibility of experience culture through gastronomy was an important element. And by the restaurants, what are the availability of the restaurants and how are they built to cater for our tourists. Always think about the tourists in terms of groups. Once again, we have to think about the groups as individuals that are from 3 or 4 or 6, 7, 8 years old to people that are 55, 65, 75, 8 years old. So we have a diversity of individuals that we have to cater to. And here, when you were asked about the Algarve, it was interesting, and it was one element that was talked about was about the menus that were diversified that catered for the different tastes of the different individuals. So we have the menus that cater for young kids, for teenagers, for people that are less adventurous, and for people that are more adventurous and want to experience the cultural elements which is transmitted through the local gastronomy. So that was an element. It's also an element that is used to differentiate the Algarve brand from other destinations. Of course, here, if you think about it, this dimension, there was a huge effort in terms of the tourism, Algarve Tourism Board, in terms of training staff and training entrepreneurs to increase their menus and diversify their menus. So what they were doing, they opened a lot of gastronomy schools that cater for cooks. So to think about what could they offer, what cultural elements, and also by valorizing the cultural elements and cultural gastronomy as a differentiating point from other destinations. Also, there was an effort here for training staff, giving the proper training to serve these segments, which took us to another element that's quite important for definition of the brand, which was the local people. So here the local people was interesting because local people is actually one of the most important variables, one of the reasons why people say that brands cannot be managed as a product, service, or an organization, because people cannot be controlled. Obviously, nobody wants to control people. People are free to be what they are, to be with their own personality, and they interact in their own interest. Of course, that's the beauty of mankind, the freedom of will. But the interesting part is that if you're talking about in terms of on a tourism, in a tourism aspect, the majority of tourists, when the way they interact with local people, the majority of the time, is because local people are doing a job, be either in a museum or at a restaurant or at a bar, being a policeman, being at a police border, whatever. Normally, when you interact with these people, they are doing a role, they are doing a job, they are providing a service. So the issue here is what kind of job they are providing, what kind of training do they have that can satisfy or are they are current with the offer of a service. So here is the role of management entrepreneurs in terms of training and give the proper training and the proper tools for for the satisfaction of the employees. So here we can manage this variable, giving incentives for entrepreneurs to give better training to the employees, to the tourism industry employees. Of course, there was a interesting element here when we starting to compare the Algarve to Costa del Sol, and there was a difference between the local people, and we identify here two reasons why British people will say, well, we love the local people in Portugal and specifically in the Algarve because they are family oriented, they are helpful, they talk to you, they seem to care about you. And we went to a little bit to research why was this happening, what's going on, and we check. When we check with the entrepreneurs, both in the Algarve and the Costa del Sol, and we check also how these companies, how these restaurants, how these bars manage the offer in the market. It was interesting to see that the Spanish in Costa del Sol, typically restaurants or bars, they give objectives. Part of the income, like in the US, it's part on variable income. So the more you sell per table, the more the employee makes. So this, but there's one thing that the US has and Europe does not have. It's a tip. We don't tip. So they know that the majority of European tourists will not tip the local people. So one mechanism or one strategy for the employees to increase their income is to rotate tables. So there is kind of a pressure in Spain to make people consume more. If you're not consuming, well, go, and the tourists can come and consume more products. It was interesting because in the Algarve, this situation doesn't happen. They have a fixed income. There's no variable. So it means also the employee does not feel the pressure or don't make the pressure on the tourists. So tourists will just have a coffee, stay there, relax, and there's no the local players are not as aggressive with the tourists for consumption. And the British were laughing about that, and they were valorizing that. It was a much more relaxed environment than when consuming products or consuming in terms of restaurants and bars than in Spain. So that's one element that we identified was the process of restaurants and bars, a difference between the management in Algarve and Costa del Sol. And the interesting element it was interesting was the turnover. It seems that there was bigger turnover in Costa del Sol than in the Algarve, meaning that repeat visitors were recognized in the Algarve. And that kind of made people feel welcome in the Algarve. And that, again, was something that were looked as a positive element. So people were saying, yes, we go to Algarve. You always go to the Algarve for 10 years now. We started coming with our son. Our kids were 1 year old, now they're 11. And the guys all recognize, they always recognize, see us, they all ask for our children. So we feel welcome. We feel that we are part of something. That it was interesting because it increased brand loyalty with the Algarve. And it seems that in Costa del Sol, there's huge turnover in terms of people. So they have more employees from Britain, for instance, that local kids that are university kids that spend 2 or 3 months in Costa del Sol to make some money and go back to England. And in Europe, that was not happening. Of course, once again, we were talking about the different sides of industry. Costa del Sol is a much more developed region in terms of tourism, much more offer and many more visitors than the Algarve. So we cannot forget that aspect in terms of when we're comparing these two different regions. But it's interesting here that local people were such an important aspect on the image of the Algarve. And of course, here is an aspect that is highly controlled by managers. So here the element is guarantee that managers or owners of restaurant business guarantee or avoid big turnover of employees. So guarantee that jobs during the years with the same staff. Something that is good for business and good for the destination. Another dimension that emerged was language. Language was the element of simplicity. Manage that we can be in a place that we will be understood. So it's kind of easy to consume the product. It's simple. It's not a problem. So it doesn't present a huge complexity. So that was something that was also valorized in the Algarve, knowing that people will talk and will speak English. But there was also an interesting aspect of the language, also interesting how people, the interpretation of language. And people, if they thought about a destination, say, well, in Turkey, everybody speaks English, but they speak English because they cater for tourism, because they are sold, because they are catering for tourists. So everything is fabricated for tourists. It's not based on education, on the education on schools. So here is interesting that what this should do. Yes, English is the basic language of Europe. Europe is the main in Europe. The main language is English. It's interesting that Britain left Europe, but the country left, but the language stays. But it's interesting how you communicate language, how you communicate proficiency of language. You should communicate proficiency, telling people that, well, English is learned when you are 3 years old at school. So it's from basic curriculum. It's not because of the tourism, it's because the society itself, the entire society itself needs to speak English because in order to communicate within European Union. So that lowered the element of thinking about a place being too touristy to a place that people speak English because they are educated in order to dialogue with the different people from around Europe. Finally, there was another dimension that emerged, which was the dimension distance. Here, the distance we could see about our brand would be emerged as a exotic or something more simple and not as complex. Of course, when you talk about distance, what we want in terms of destinations is to guarantee that we have direct flights or trains or ways of transportation that makes it easy or easy to get to the destination. Of course, if you talk about targeting or trying to get people from the California or New York, the aspect that you have to communicate much more in exotic place because the effort to reach the Algarve is much bigger than for a person from London. A Londoner in 2 hours and a half is in the Algarve a straight shot. If you talk about California, we talk about 2 flights and probably 16 or 18 hours. So it's much more complex. The investment of time and the financial, it's much higher in terms of consumption. So here, if you think about distance, the elements that we have to communicate for these different groups has to be slightly different. But the elements here in terms of when you think about these elements of destination brand and the interesting part of destination brands and this complexity is that you can see all these dimensions, they interact. So they are not isolated. They interact. All these variables that we grouped in the dimensions, they interact, and is the interaction of these variables grouped in dimensions that contribute to the image of a destination. That will make the destination interesting or not for consumption. It will be these dimensions, these variables that will motivate me to consume. So as a person in charge of the destination, I have to list this list of variables. What are the variables that are relevant in terms of building of image, of being the trigger for consumption? So of course, what I'm showing to you is a model based on tourism, a model based on a specific destination in terms of Algarve. But of course, this model is adapted then for different types of segments. You think about students, international students within a city. What are the variables that are relevant for them? It's totally different variables. Different way I have. If the variables are different, I need to manage them differently in terms of products and in terms of communication. Also, which becomes very clear is that if you think about a destination is much more about communication. It's also about market management. It's about products. It's about giving meaning to elements, about physical elements. So it means that I need to create meaning to certain objects. In building meaning, building a story and communicating that story. Of course, that means that managing a brand, of course, is not the role of a marketeer. It's a role of the entire society, meaning that everybody has to be involved in the construction of this destination brand. It's about citizens, it's about the business community, it's about politicians, local, regional, and national. So it's only involving all these different actors on destination brands that I can really have build a value proposition that makes sense, and I can target or can be willing to attract certain segments. The relevance of having an active role in terms of building this strategy and building this value proposition is based on one assumption. If I don't do a plan, if I don't build what I mean, or what is the value proposition of my destination, other actors will do it. Other organizations will do it. Other organizations will take control. I mean, if me as a politician and a representative of the local people, of the local business, if I don't set up a plan and a value proposition of this destination brand, which group the different actors. If I don't do that, it's guaranteed, if you talk about tourism, it's guaranteed that tour operators in different countries will build an image that serve themselves, serve their interests, serve their consumers, and they will sell that image to their target market. And now we'll have no deal or no control on that. So what we need to have a certain type of control. If you want to have certain type of control, we need to set up a model where I build a value proposition, which I build goals, objectives, which are built, of course, on the local conditions, on the will of the citizens, and the will of the business community. So it's interesting because when you're building a brand, building a value proposition, the way you build by involving these different actors. Of course, if you don't build these different actors, and if you don't build the value proposition involving these different actors, you are just doing communication, you're just doing advertisement. If you're only doing advertisement without the product backing up your value proposition, it's not going to work, because then the reality and the promises that you're offering, it doesn't meet the expectations of the consumers. So sooner or later, you're gonna fail, because you don't have the product and you don't have the support of the business community or the citizens. So that's one reason why destination brand is one important aspect of involving local people, involving the local elements, increasing the relevance of the local artifacts, giving meaning to them, and giving relevance, important, and help local people to be proud of their culture, proud of the rich of what they have to offer, and in order to maintain their own culture. So that's taking benefits, getting rewards from the local culture in order to survive in this more globalized world. So my presentation is finished now. I hope I was clear in terms of complexity, in terms of destination brand. That was the element I wanted to bring to you. It was the complexity of building brands. Brands is not about advertising or about promotion. Is about involvement of local entrepreneurs, local people. It's about bringing the elements, the cultural elements that are inherent to that place, and use it for the sustainability of the places. Okay, thank you very much. I hope it was clear on the presentation.
Yeah, thank you so much, João. I think that your presentation made it even more clear to me, the strong relationship between place branding or city marketing and planning and urban design. And it's interesting because in planning, and normally we have this approach that is based on the ideal city. So we plan to have an ideal city, the best we can for everybody. And in planning for place branding or city marketing, it's not exactly like that. You basically have to find out who do you want to attract and what in your place can be focus of our attention to attract people more, right? It's like an inverted planning based on you say semiotics or the power of meaning, right? But anyway, I think that you got people here that might have more questions. So please, thank you very much for your presentation. And whoever wants to ask João questions, please go ahead and open the mic and ask. No questions? Oh, Larry, please.
Oh, I have a question.
Okay, go ahead, Bill.
I have a question on Um, how is the influence or the power of the local people um, given listened to by the big tourist companies or people who are marketing your place? I think your model is very localized model, and I think that's appropriate. But you didn't tell us how the localized model can become useful or implemented by in a productive way.
Well, the aspect here in terms of methodology, when you're building the destination brand and the value proposition, when we were working on that in city branding, what we do in terms of methodologically is involving the local people in terms of we try to sample local people, try to take into consideration their awareness, their thoughts about what is being developed. So we take into consideration that into the model when you're building this value proposition. Of course, we also take into consideration that representation of the local politician, local authorities are representing the local people, which of course local people vote and elect on these local authorities. So here the local authorities that are representing the local people. So we try to do in two ways. First, involving local people in our models. So we go one way of when we build the value proposition, we do interview local people, so surveys or in-depth interviews, and then have the local politicians that represent these local people are the ones that implement. So we try to balance that. Of course, it's a very tricky balance, of course. And nowadays, what we see is cities being used for tourists with the Airbnbs and expelling the local people, local residents. There's a struggle here in tourism that might be affecting the balance of cities. But that's the role of politicians giving a balance, and also the role of local people to raise these issues within the local authorities and the local politicians.
Larry, you had a question, right? Please.
Yeah, thank you, João. I enjoyed your presentation, and I agree with Vicente that you convinced me even more of the relationship between placemaking, tourism, marketability, and urban planning and urban design. I wanted to ask you a question that was something that was sort of coming toward me during your lecture, and then in the very last slide, you introduced a term that you really didn't seem to address in the rest of your talk, which is you talked about sustainable development. So I wanted to mention the concept of ecotourism, because if you're marketing a place for tourists, the place isn't going to be there anymore if you don't preserve it and conserve it and protect it. So not only the natural environment, but also the cultural environment. So I don't know if you've heard, in Barcelona, there was a citizen movement, and they made a film about it called Bye Bye Barcelona, where the citizens of Barcelona basically told the city, we're tired of all this mass tourism coming in, and you have to control it. It's destroying our city and our quality of life, and we need to really exert some increasing controls and make the tourism not destroy the livability of our city. So I wonder about, when I looked at all the variables in your model, it seems to me that there's an argument called natural capitalism that basically says that the economy of a place or a production of anything should really be based on the natural resources, and in this case, the cultural resources. They are the essence of what defines the future of the Algarve. The Algarve is not going to work if it doesn't have the buildings, the historic structures, as well as the physical beauty of the beaches. So it seems, I wonder if there's a way in your model to increase the role of the ecosystem and to think about ecotourism as a way of thinking about the future of a place like the Algarve.
I think there is, and I think one of the things that the tourism board are now are aware of that, something that they were not aware in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, and then become aware because actually if they continue doing that in that through that path, they don't have anything. They cannot differentiate. So they don't have a business. The second is Barcelona and the cities. What's going on in terms of of what the pressure of the local people? Are they saying like we have to finish with the cruise, we have to limit Airbnbs, we cannot have those. We have to have housing available for the local people. So we have to limit the 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 the, 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 the imbalance of tourism and create a balance again of visitors versus the people that live in place. So it's about balancing this element within the cities. In the Algarve, there's now clearly this worry about, and we try to prevent the mistakes that were done in 70s and 80s, which there are still certain areas that they still have. But now in terms of the planning permissions, the way you can develop, there are really strict rules in order to prevent, again, elements that ruin the environment, either landscape or the cultural elements. So I'm trying to again they are investment in terms of anthropology, identifying the roots, the investigation and research within the university to bring again certain elements that define what is that local people. So I think nowadays, and it's interesting because of the differentiation is created the needs to again to go back to sustainability, either in terms of nature or in terms of cultural elements.
Right, and then the last thing, thank you, that's great. And the last thing I would add is you mentioned at the beginning also, in this post-pandemic period, seems to me that tourism marketing is going to have more to do with how tourism destinations are protecting the environment and protecting people and creating social distancing, at least until we know more about this illness. So that's going to be part of tourism branding as well, I'm assuming.
Yeah, definitely. Actually, the pandemic, actually, it's a good way for people to stop and think about and start managing again the capacity.
No, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed that. Two questions. Trick one, first of all. What's your identity attached to New Zealand?
So, sorry?
What is the identity you attach to New Zealand?
100% pure. Nature and 100% pure. That's what they've been. So,
sorry guys, Cobus is in New Zealand, so there's a time lag in the conversation. So
okay,
I don't know if this is working. The reason I ask is that has caused for a lot of questioning amongst professionals within New Zealand, because you cannot be 100% pure. And the big thing about clean and green has made professionals question internal practices. And it's actually been quite good because it's made us quite critical. We are not that clean and green. And when you look at all the stats, and it's actually brought about a sort of an internal questioning, which I find quite healthy. But can I just ask a second question? When I look over the events of the last.
Oh, you got frozen, or was it me?
No, got frozen.
Yeah, that's the problem of Zoom sometimes.
Yeah.
That to do with the virtuosity, I guess, or I don't know, not virtuosity, but the virtues of associating with New Zealand from a clean green production and of all sorts of other production, movie making, its food, and those sort of exports. And so that brand is actually pivoting strongly towards the
oh gosh.
How do you see that playing out in your experience, the post-COVID kind of role of identity?
I couldn't hear everything, but the image that is being transmitted, and the image that I know that New Zealand has problems now because of cattle and production and in terms of contamination of rivers, but still the image that is being transmitted and the image that we have is a pristine country, and that's why, for instance, agriculture, we see New Zealand as added value because of nature, because it's a distant place, a distant country that is more pure in terms of isolated. So there's some valorization in terms of specifically when I lived in England, is even more in terms of butter, in terms of meat, it was giving valorization in terms of quality. Of course, one thing that I think is very well done in New Zealand is a very unified system. So you unify the production of agriculture, but unify also with the rugby team, we unify with IT, software development, universities. So it's a very uniform system that transmits kind of optimism, kind of sustainability. So it transmits values that are interesting values in terms of the place. So of course now with COVID even more, because with your prime minister, which is quite popular now everywhere, so transmit even those values that I think were never lost actually. And with the Lord of the Rings and all these elements that New Zealand is a very extremely interesting case in terms of branding. I think probably it's one of the most interesting country brands, most successful actually.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to promote New Zealand, but what's intellectually, and thank you for that, but what's intellectually interesting for me is that role of identity outside of tourism. I think that's given the future.
Yeah, but it was very well built, because not only tourism, it was built, all the structure is really well built, very thought. And it was, I think it was 95, 96, so it was a long time ago that it was developed. Yeah. It's really well done. So it's kind of an inspiration for different countries.
Yeah, no, that's true. Thank you.
Thank you, Cobus. If anybody, well, we got only David, Cobus, and Bill. So I guess that if nobody has any more questions, thank you so much, João. That was very enlightening. So a lot of images came to my mind when you're talking about the negative impact. I thought of those huge cruise ships arriving in Venice or
Barcelona.
Barcelona, or I was in Greece a couple of years ago with my family, and it's like thinking about 2 or 3 of those huge ships arriving at the same time in those small little towns. Like, wow, that's kind of it's almost like a D-Day invasion of Normandy, right? It's ridiculous. So how can you plan for that? How you can control that as a planner, as a designer? It's impossible, right?
Impossible.
So it's very interesting. But
there's no rewards, because then the local people do not benefit. And tourism to benefit local people. If it doesn't benefit local people, you shouldn't do tourism.
Right. It's complicated. But thanks very much. So thank you.